Lot's daughters made an extreme decision to get their father drunk and sleep with him in order to guarantee descendants. It's a scene that feels like it was taken straight from an ancient tragedy, but it's recorded in the Bible, in the book of Genesis. How did this shocking point in the narrative come about? What led Lot's family to live isolated in a cave after escaping the fire that fell on Sodom? Today we'll walk through the entire story of Lot, from his rash choices that led him to Sodom, through the destruction of the city, the wife turned into salt, up to the moment when his daughters, trapped by fear and isolation, changed the course of entire nations. If this kind of content, biblical stories told in detail in a calm and reflective tone, is the kind of thing you enjoy listening to at night, go ahead and hit the like button, comment where and what time you're watching, and subscribe so you don't miss the next ones. Now, dim the lights, adjust your pillow, and let's begin. Lot departs with his grandfather Terah, his uncle Abraham, and Sarai, Abraham's wife. A small family caravan. If you close your eyes, you can see it. Cloth tents being folded at dawn, the deep groans of camels, children laughing and running after goats, men adjusting the ropes of packs, women balancing jars of water on their heads. All of this with no Google Maps, no Spotify playlist for the road, no Uber with air conditioning, just the dry wind, the immense sun, and a strange trust that there was something better ahead. And here, a contrast already begins to take shape. Abraham, the uncle, is moved by faith. He follows because he believes in invisible promises, like someone walking in the dark, trusting that there's a bridge on the next step. Lot, on the other hand, seems guided by a different compass, by what looks fertile, rich, prosperous, immediate. Abraham looks upward. Lot looks downward, calculating advantages, and this small detail already sets the stage for both of their destinies, watching it all, and perhaps learning the wrong lessons. When famine came to Canaan, the two went down to Egypt. The Bible almost sounds repetitive on this. Whenever there's no bread, Egypt shows up as the region's supermarket. It was the land of the Nile, always fertile, always full. And of course it was also full of illusions. Abraham and Sarai had their first episode of tension with Pharaoh there, and left somewhat expelled, but with more wealth than when they had arrived. Lot was with them, back in Canaan. Both prospered so much that the land could no longer sustain their herds together. Picture green valleys full of goats and sheep, but not green enough for so many animals. Shepherds quarreling over wells, arguing over patches of grass. Two men fighting because a goat crossed an imaginary line on the ground. It was the ancient version of a condo fight over a parking spot. Abraham calmly proposes separation. Choose, Lot, go wherever you want, and I'll go the opposite way. It's generous, wise, confident. He knows he loses nothing by letting the other choose first, because he believes God takes care of what remains. Lot, of course, looks out and sees the lush plains of the Jordan, almost a green paradise amid the dry landscape. And he chooses without hesitation. Fertility, beauty, prosperity, but also Sodom. It's curious to think about it. Sometimes what looks greener is only because it sits on top of sewage. But Lot couldn't know that. Or maybe he could, and simply ignored it. He went there. Abraham stayed with what was left, and that small decision made in the field under the sun separated destinies in a way that would echo for centuries. Now take a deep breath with me. Imagine the wind hitting your face, the sunset tinting the Jordan fields in gold. Sheep bleating. In the distance, children gathering the last jars of water. A calm, almost peaceful scene, if not for the hidden detail. Sodom waiting around the bend. Abraham and Lot were now separated. The uncle, with his calmness, had remained in Canaan. The nephew, more ambitious, had already settled in Sodom, that address which, if it were today, would have a reputation worthy of a negative trending topic. But before we return to the nephew, we need to pull back the curtain on a classic scene. Abraham, sitting at the entrance of his tent under the trees of Mamre. Picture it. Midday heat, the hot wind blowing dust, and Abraham, elderly but alert, sitting in the shade of thick oaks, trying to ease his weary body. Suddenly 3 men appear before him. The Bible doesn't build suspense with cinematic music, it simply says, they appeared. But the intensity of the scene suggests something beyond human. Abraham recognizes something sacred in their presence. Without hesitation, he rises and bows before the visitors. The gesture is quick, almost instinctive, and here lies an interesting contrast. Hospitality in the ancient world was more than good manners. It was a matter of life and death. To offer water, shade, and food to strangers was like sharing your own oxygen. Abraham not only offers, he insists, asks them to wash their feet, to stay and rest. He prepares bread, meat, milk. Imagine the smell rising from the makeshift oven, the butter melting, the sound of Sarah kneading dough with firm hands. And in the middle of that ordinary meal, the extraordinary happens. One of the visitors announces, within a year, Sarah, yes, Sarah, already elderly, already worn by time, will have a son. The impossible promise, spoken right there, in the shadow of a tent. Sarah laughs, hidden behind the fabric, unable to hold back the irony. And it's in that human detail, that laugh, both incredulous and nervous, that the story feels closer to us. Who hasn't laughed at something that seemed too good to be true? Now notice the contrast. Abraham experiences the impossible taking shape right in front of his tent. Promises of descendants, of future, of continuity. Lot at that same time is sinking deeper into the life of Sodom. While Abraham receives angels, Lot receives complicated neighbors. While the uncle prepares fresh bread, the nephew grows accustomed to the sour smell of a city corroded by its own habits. And that difference is subtle but powerful. Abraham trusts even when he doesn't understand. Lot chooses based on what he sees even when he should be suspicious. Abraham makes room for divine visitors. Lot will soon make room for dangerous compromises. Lot had already chosen his address. The lush plains of the Jordan, fertile and appealing, led directly to Sodom. It was like seeing a flashing sign saying investment opportunity, and he couldn't resist. And for a time, the choice seemed good. Rich lands, rising social position, an urban life offering more than the open tents of Canaan. But there was one troubling detail. The city was rotten inside. The Bible describes the inhabitants of Sodom as extremely wicked. It's a dry phrase, but powerful. Imagine living in a place where evil isn't the exception, but the routine, where every corner hides a scheme, every business has a trick, every neighbor seems to be conspiring against another. And in the middle of this, Lot tried to live. The Apostle Peter, centuries later, would say that Lot was tormented day after day by what he saw. And you can picture it, a man trying to preserve some morality while everything around him collapsed. But before the city's own behavior swallowed him up, war came. Kings from Mesopotamia marched against Sodom, Gomorrah, and other nearby cities. It was the kind of ancient conflict that moved crowds, spears clashing, war chariots creaking, dust rising on the horizon. A quick, violent battle. Sodom lost. Its goods were plundered, and among the captives was Lot. Here, the irony is almost cinematic. The nephew who chose the promising place ends up kidnapped along with the entire city. And who comes to the rescue? Uncle Abraham. The very one who had kept the apparently less fertile lands, but, through faith, had become strong enough to face armies. Abraham organizes a small force, trained men from his household, allied neighbors, and sets out on a nighttime raid. Picture the silence before battle, torches flickering like fireflies in the darkness, measured footsteps on the cold sand, held breaths. Then the surprise attack. The enemy army is defeated, and Abraham frees not only Lot, but also the inhabitants of Sodom and all the goods that had been plundered. This episode has an important detail. It's here that Abraham meets Melchizedek, king of Salem, and priest of the Most High God, a mysterious figure who appears as a blessing in the midst of war. Meanwhile, Lot simply returns to Sodom. Yes, after everything, he goes back to the same troubled place. It's like being rescued from a disastrous party and the next day buying a ticket for the next one. The contrast is both painful and instructive. Abraham, guided by faith, strengthens alliances and receives blessings. Lot, guided by convenience, goes back to the environment that had already proven how destructive it could be. It's as if life had given him a chance for change, and he simply said, "No thanks, I'd rather stay here." Close your eyes for a moment. Imagine the silence after the battle, the smell of smoke, weapons abandoned on the ground, and the relief of freed captives, a cool wind blowing over the devastated field, and in the middle of it all, Lot returning to his city, perhaps relieved, perhaps confused, but certainly still bound to the illusions of Sodom. It's night time when the two angels arrive at the city. The scene is almost cinematic. Narrow streets, the dim light of oil lamps, drunken laughter in dark corners, the smell of spilled wine and meat roasting on makeshift fires. Lot is sitting at the city gate, not by accident. To sit there was a sign of status. It was like having a seat on the town council, being part of the decisions. He was no longer just a foreigner, he had already achieved a social position among the Sodomites. When he sees the visitors, Lot gets up and insists that they stay at his house. He bows, offers hospitality, almost repeating the gesture of his uncle Abraham, but in an anxious, almost nervous way. It's as if he knew that letting them spend the night in the street would mean delivering innocent men to the savagery of the city. And he knew very well what his neighbors were capable of. The angels agree. They enter his house. Lot prepares. Unleavened bread, simple and quick, perhaps with trembling hands, maybe glancing out the window from time to time. The meal seems calm until the city notices. Men of Sodom, young and old, surround the house. Not just 2 or 3 curious onlookers. The Bible describes it as a crowd, and they don't ask politely. They demand that Lot hand over the visitors so they can know them. The word is a euphemism, of course. The intention is violence, collective abuse. Picture the tension, the heavy pounding at the door, shouting voices, grotesque laughter, the stench of sweat from the packed crowd. Inside, the heavy silence of those who realize the night has turned into a nightmare. And in that moment, Lot makes a controversial decision. He steps outside, closing the door behind him, and tries to negotiate. He begs them not to harm his guests, but his solution is to offer his own daughters. It's shocking, a gesture that, to us today, sounds unthinkable, but to Lot it was an attempt to preserve the sacred duty of hospitality at any cost, and also a reflection of how deeply the culture of the city had already corroded him. The contrast is brutal. Abraham had welcomed visitors with bread, shade, and the promise of life. Lot now tries to save visitors by offering his own family. The uncle receives blessing, the nephew offers despair. The mob doesn't accept. They shout louder, push harder, threaten to break down the door. At that moment, the angels intervene. They pull Lot inside and shut the door. Then something strange happens. They strike the men outside with blindness, not in a poetic way, but literally. The crowd, confused, starts groping, stumbling, still trying to find the door, but unable to locate it. It's as if the darkness that had already lived inside them had finally taken their eyes. Inside the house, silence returns. Only the sound of Lot's pounding heart, the frightened looks of his daughters and the angels, who were no longer just guests, but judges. They announce, "The city will be destroyed. The cry of its wickedness has reached God, and the time is up." Take a deep breath with me. Picture the scene through the window, a street full of blind men, staggering in the dark, banging against walls, tripping over one another. A heavy silence inside and an invisible sentence already sealed. As the angels had been traveling towards Sodom, Abraham had accompanied them part of the way, and there, on a hill from which he could probably see the fertile valley in the distance, God revealed to the patriarch what was about to happen. The cities of the plain would be judged and destroyed. Their wickedness had reached its limit. Abraham listens in silence, but within him something resists, and here unfolds one of the most intimate and surprising dialogues in the Bible. Abraham decides to intercede, not for himself, but for the city. And the scene is almost too bold, a man debating with the Creator about justice. Abraham starts carefully. "What if there are 50 righteous in the city? Will you destroy the whole place, sparing neither the innocent nor the guilty?" It's a question filled with courage but also compassion. And God answers, "If there are 50, the city will be spared." Abraham breathes, perhaps sweating, perhaps with a trembling voice, and presses further. 45, 40, 30, 20, and finally 10. It's like a marketplace negotiation, except the item on the line is the life of thousands of people. The most fascinating part is the tone. Abraham is not arrogant. He admits, "I am but dust and ashes." But still, he speaks. Still, he asks, like a humble child insisting with a father, knowing he's asking for something big, but believing the other's heart can yield. And here, a pause. Abraham is not trying to trick God. He's actually discovering and showing that divine justice is not blind or cruel, but filled with compassion. With each reduction, God agrees, 10 righteous people would be enough to save the whole city. Think about it, 10. That's not many. It's like 2 large families or a group of friends. 10 people doing what is right could sustain an entire corrupt community. But Sodom didn't even have that. While this dialogue unfolded on the hills, night was falling over Sodom. Abraham would return to his tent, perhaps with a heavy heart, but still with hope that at least 10 righteous might be found. Lot, his daughters, maybe a few decent neighbors. Who knows? This scene shows us something remarkable. Abraham intercedes not only because his nephew lives there, but also for people he doesn't know. It's a gesture of empathy that goes beyond family. He doesn't want to see the innocent perish with the guilty. It's the kind of concern we rarely have for strangers, and yet in that moment, an old shepherd in the desert had for the most corrupt city of his time. Now close your eyes for a moment. Picture the plain from above in the silence of the night. the dim lights of Sodom flickering in the distance like restless fireflies. Abraham standing, leaning on his staff, looking toward that distant glow, not knowing whether his prayer would be enough. The cold wind blowing against his clothes, the massive stars shining like silent witnesses. That's the weight of intercession. It's not loud, not dramatic. It's persistent, almost whispered. A calm conversation that carries the destiny of many. After the tense scene of the blind mob at the door, the angels look at Lot and speak urgently. Gather your family. Leave this place. Now. The sentence was set. It wasn't advice. It was an order. The city had gone beyond the limit, and there would be no more negotiation. But Lot hesitates. It's almost unbelievable. The man who had seen his neighbors in fury, who had been saved by angels pulling him in with their own hands, still hesitates. Attachments, routine, fear of the unknown. How often do we recognize ourselves in that, even knowing something is toxic? We still cling to familiarity. The angels then literally take Lot, his wife, and his 2 daughters by the hand and lead them out. Picture this scene. Firm hands pulling, hurried steps through the dark street, trembling oil lamps, pounding hearts. The distant sounds of the city still awake, unaware that its last night had begun. Once outside the limits, the angels say, "Flee for your lives, don't look back, don't stop anywhere in the plain, run to the mountains." A clear order, almost military. The future lies ahead, not behind, but Lot still negotiates. He asks not to go so far, he asks to take refuge in a smaller town called Zoar. It's as if he still wants a middle ground, to flee but not too far, to escape but not completely leave his comfort zone. And God, in his patience, grants it, and then it happens. The sky begins to change. Picture the sound. First a distant thunder, then a muffled roar, as if the earth itself were taking a deep breath. From above, fire and sulfur fall. Not timid sparks, but full flames covering the city. The stench of burning sulfur, the heat rising from the ground, the screams of the surprised crowd. Sodom and Gomorrah are consumed in an instant. Lot and his family run. Rushed steps, dust rising, hot wind against their faces. The daughters perhaps crying, their hearts racing, their vision blurred by tears. And in the middle of this desperate flight, the wife looks back. We don't know what was in her gaze. Perhaps longing for a comfortable life, perhaps curiosity, perhaps disbelief. But that simple gesture breaks the command. And in an instant, she turns into a pillar of salt. Picture the scene, a human body, halted, hardening, crystallizing, the wind covering it in white dust, the figure frozen like a statue. Not as a theatrical punishment, but as a symbol. She was caught between past and future, between escape and attachment, between life and memory. Lot keeps going, he can't stop. The smell of smoke is in the air, the flames light up the sky as if it were daytime, and behind him a silhouette of salt rises like an eternal reminder. It's one of the most striking images in the Bible, a woman turned into a monument, not for committing great crimes, but for looking back. And here, lying in the dark, you can feel the weight of that metaphor. How many times do we look back, even when we know we need to move forward? Take a deep breath. Imagine the mountain wind hitting your face, mixed with the salty scent that now lingers in the air. The horizon is on fire, but the path still remains. And in the silence between one step and the next, only the sound of tired feet on dry ground. After the destruction of Sodom, Lot still tries to adapt. He seeks refuge in Zoar, that smaller town where he had asked for shelter. But his heart can no longer find peace. The trauma of the escape, the memory of his wife turned into salt, and the fear that divine judgment could happen again, all of that leaves him restless. Zoar is not safe, at least in Lot's mind. So he makes a decision. He abandons the town and heads up into the mountains. Not as someone seeking adventure, but as someone fleeing from everything. It's a return to solitude. And there he finds shelter in a cave. Picture the scene. The valley below still carries the smell of ashes. The ruins of Sodom and Gomorrah smolder in the distance like embers that never go out. The air is heavy, the silence deep. On the mountain slopes, the cave appears like an open wound in the rock. Cold, damp, dark. There's no town, no neighbors, no marketplace, only stones, wind, and shadow. Lot settles there with his 2 daughters. The contrast is stark. He had lived in the urban comfort of Sodom, sitting at the city gates, debating with leaders, surrounded by movement. Now he shares dry bread and scarce water inside a grotto. Light enters only through the opening, bringing weak brightness during the day and absolute darkness at night. The ground is hard, the ceiling drips cold droplets, the air smells of wet earth and mold. And in that heavy silence, the human drama deepens. Lot's daughters, with no prospects, start to think. To us, hearing the story from the outside, their reasoning seems distorted. But inside their minds, isolated, without husbands, without community, without a future, arises the fear that their family's lineage will disappear. They believe no one is left in the world, that the smoldering valley was the end of civilization. Consider their loneliness. 2 young women who saw fire fall from the sky, lost their mother in a single night, lost an entire city, and now live inside a cold cave with an aging father. What takes shape here is not merely incest, it is desperation, a perception warped by isolation and trauma, and then the decision. They plan to get their father drunk night after night and lie with him. Not out of desire, but for the survival of the lineage. To preserve descendants, they say. It's a desperate logic, born in a cave. Now take a deep breath. The weight of the scene is heavy, but notice the atmosphere too. The sound of weakly burning firewood at the cave's entrance, improvised wine being poured into clay cups, the darkness swallowing each gesture. The environment is cold, silent, stifled. There are no witnesses but the stone walls. From that incestuous union, 2 sons are born. The first, Moab, will give rise to the Moabite people. The second, Ben-Ami, will be the father of the Ammonites. 2 nations that, ironically, would later become constant enemies of Israel. The fruit of desperation in the cave echoes as conflict for generations. What's curious is that the Bible does not describe immediate judgment on Lot for this episode. It simply narrates it, almost coldly, as if to say, this is the result of isolation, fear, and unresolved trauma. Life goes on, but with deep scars. Now close your eyes. Imagine the darkness of the cave, the sound of the wind outside, the slow drip of water falling onto smooth stones. Inside, a small flame flickers, lighting tired faces and eyes full of silence. The cave is not just physical shelter, it is metaphor. Refuge that is also prison. Safety that is also solitude. From that strange and somber episode, 2 sons were born. The first, Moab, born of the older daughter; the second, Ben-Ami, son of the younger. Their names already carry the weight of their origin, Moab meaning something like from the father, and Ben-Ami, son of my people. They are not subtle names. They are living reminders tattooed onto their identity that their origin came from a delicate situation. But, as so often happens in the Bible, entire peoples arise even from the most twisted stories. Moab grew and gave rise to the Moabites. Ben-Ami became the ancestor of the Ammonites. 2 peoples who would inhabit regions neighboring Israel. 2 peoples who, by a twist of fate, would spend centuries in friction with Abraham's descendants. Think about the contrast. Abraham had received a promise of descendants as numerous as the stars, and Lot, his nephew, would father 2 peoples from a desperate act in a cave. Both would originate nations, but while Abraham's descendants bore the mark of faith, Lot's descendants bore the mark of survival and trauma. The Moabites settled east of the Dead Sea, mountainous land, fertile in some valleys, full of pastures. The Ammonites occupied territory farther north, near the area we know today as Jordan. Brother peoples, yet different, always close, always in tension with Israel. Throughout the biblical narrative, these nations appear repeatedly, sometimes as direct enemies in battle, sometimes as troublesome neighbors, sometimes as religious temptation. The Moabites, for instance, became known for the worship of Chemosh, their national god, a cult that included practices the Israelites considered abominable. The Ammonites had their own deity, Milcom or Molech, with dark rituals that echoed as a warning in Israel's heart. But here's a beautiful curiosity. Despite the heavy origin and turbulent history, the Moabites also appear in luminous moments. Just remember Ruth, the Moabite, the woman who would become King David's great-grandmother and, in the genealogy, part of Jesus' lineage. In other words, even a people born from strange circumstances carried within them a spark of redemption. The Ammonites, on the other hand, held more firmly to their opposition. They appear in battles, in disputed borders, in stories of kings who tried to pressure Israel. Yet even they, for all the tension, were also part of the vast landscape of the promise, neighboring peoples with whom Israel would have to learn to deal. Now close your eyes. Picture the region's geography. The Dead Sea gleaming still under the sun, rough mountains around, goats climbing rocks, shepherds calling their flocks at dusk. In the valleys, small Moabite villages. Farther north, Ammonite encampments, peoples born from a lonely cave, now spread across the landscape, living, fighting, prospering. This is the paradox of Lot's story. He wanted to preserve his lineage, and he succeeded. But the way he did so left scars that would echo for centuries. What was born of fear and seclusion did not disappear. It became a neighbor. It became conflict. It became a constant reminder that choices made in the darkness of caves can echo in broad daylight. Take a deep breath once more. Feel the region's dry heat, the smell of warm earth, the horizon cut by lines of stone. Peoples arising, stories intertwining, all of it from a man who, in the end, only wanted to survive in silence with his 2 daughters. After the cave episode, the Bible tells us no more about Lot. We don't know how his final days were. Whether he aged in silence in the mountains, whether he tried to rebuild his life, whether he still carried the pain of losing his wife and the weight of his choices. The narrative simply dissolves. It's as if, after Sodom's smoke and the cave's cold echo, the man was lost in the shadows. But silence doesn't mean forgetfulness. Lot's memory appears again at strategic moments, like a reminder that insists on returning, not for glory, but for warning. In the New Testament, the Apostle Peter mentions Lot in his second letter. He calls him righteous, someone who, even while living amid corruption, was tormented daily by the wickedness around him. It's interesting. Despite his failures and misguided decisions, Lot is remembered for his anguish in the face of injustice, as if his sensitivity was still proof of faith. And Jesus, in the Gospel of Luke, also mentions him. Not with long stories, but with a short, weighty phrase. Remember Lot's wife, a memory that crosses centuries. The pillar of salt, unmoving, becomes an eternal symbol, a reminder that looking back can cost the future. Close your eyes and picture that memory, a lonely statue in the desert, crystallized salt gleaming in the sun while generations pass by and point to it. A figure that doesn't speak but shouts through its presence, "Do not look back." What's curious is that Lot's remembrance is not heroic. He is not described as a patriarch, nor as an example of unshakable faith. His story is marked by hesitation, by fragile decisions, by choices that led to suffering. And yet, his memory is used as teaching. This shows us a fascinating detail of the biblical narrative. Even imperfect characters, even those who fail, still carry value as reminders. It isn't only Moses on the mountain or David with his harp who deserve to be remembered. Lot, too, with his life marked by ambiguities, appears as an echo in the sacred pages. Take a deep breath with me. Imagine an old man sitting at the mouth of a cave, looking out at the smouldering horizon that once was a city. The cold wind hitting his face, the absolute silence around him, no crowd, no herd, no council at the city gate. Only the echo of his own memory. Perhaps this is the final image of Lot, not recorded in words but suggested in silence. A man who tried to survive, who made choices, who reaped pain, but whose story was not erased. It became a warning, and so we close the 9th part, not with fireworks, not with battles, but with remembrance. Lot is not forgotten. His life, his choices, his hesitation, all of it continues to echo as metaphor, as warning, as an invitation to reflection. His life was a mosaic of contrasts. Nephew of Abraham, companion of journeys, a man who saw promises up close, yet also a man who lost himself in easy choices, who preferred the immediate shine of fertile plains over the quiet safety of faith. He experienced prosperity in Sodom, but also anguish. He was captured in war and rescued by Abraham, only to return to the same toxic city. He welcomed angels into his house, but hesitated to obey. He left only by being literally pulled out by divine messengers, but still looked back through his wife. He sought refuge in Zoar, but found no peace. He ended in a cave, where silence gave rise to desperate decisions that became entire nations. It is not the trajectory of a perfect hero. It is the trajectory of someone all too human. And perhaps that is why Lot remains in biblical memory, not as a model of greatness, but as a reminder of fragility. His wife became a pillar of salt, an eternal symbol of those who look back when they should move forward. His daughters, driven by fear, bore nations under twisted circumstances. He himself, after the cave, disappears from the sacred text, as if the echo of his life dissolved into the wind. But his memory does not vanish. Peter calls him a tormented righteous man. Jesus invokes him as a warning. He becomes part of a greater tapestry, where even the most crooked threads help form the design. And here, at the end, perhaps lies the gentlest lesson. The Bible is not made only of stories of victory. It is also made of broken, hesitant, fragile paths, because life is like that. Between confident Abrahams and wavering Lots, between clear promises and dark caves, there is room for all. Now close your eyes. Picture the plain at dawn, after the destruction. The clear sky, the still air, the smouldering ruins in the distance, and a man walking with two young women toward the mountains. The silence is heavy, but there are footsteps. Life goes on, even marked by loss. The wind blows, carrying the salt, the smell of earth, and also the promise that the story never ends in a cave. Once Israel settled in the Promised Land, Moab and Ammon remained persistent thorns. Not distant empires, but immediate neighbors, always present at the border. During the time of the Judges, the Ammonites grew bold. They oppressed tribes east of the Jordan, sparking cries for deliverance. The answer came through Jephthah, son of a prostitute, rejected by his brothers, living as an outcast. Yet when war came, Israel called him back. Jephthah first attempted diplomacy. He reminded the Ammonites that Israel had not taken their land after leaving Egypt, but had respected their borders. The Ammonites, unmoved, pressed their false claims. War followed, and Jephthah defeated Ammon decisively, freeing Israel from oppression. Moab, too, left scars in the Judges' era. Under their king Eglon, they subjugated Israel, demanding tribute. The story tells of Eglon, a very fat man, sitting in his palace in Jericho collecting Israel's taxes. He was assassinated by Ehud, a left-handed judge who concealed a sword under his robe. With one thrust, Ehud ended Moab's rule, and the people rose in revolt. Moab was defeated, and Israel had rest for years. The monarchy did not end the conflict. King Saul fought both Moab and Ammon. Later, David had a particularly complex relationship with Moab. While fleeing Saul, he entrusted his parents to the Moabite king for safety. Yet, as king, David fought Moab, defeated them, and made them subjects. Ammon's story with David was sharper. After David sent envoys in friendship, the Ammonite king humiliated them, shaving their beards and cutting their garments. An insult of the highest order. David responded with war. Israel besieged the Ammonite capital of Rabbah. During this siege, David stayed behind in Jerusalem, and there he fell into sin with Bathsheba. While his army fought Ammon, the king of Israel lost his own battle at home. Still, Ammon fell. Rabbah was taken, and the nation subdued. Generation after generation, Moab and Ammon returned as rivals, not vast powers like Egypt or Assyria, but dangerous precisely because they were close. A spark across the hills could ignite war overnight. Thus, the children of the cave had become recurring enemies in Israel's story. Not distant conquerors, but persistent reminders of fragile peace and neighborly strife. The story of Moab and Ammon continued into the words of the prophets. Isaiah lamented Moab, describing cities ruined, pride shattered, altars abandoned. Jeremiah dedicated whole chapters announcing Moab's shame and downfall. Ammon, too, was condemned. Their god Milcom would go into exile, their cities deserted. The Fiqh charges were clear: Moab's arrogance, Ammon's cruelty, and above all, their false gods. To the prophets, they were not mere political adversaries, but spiritual symbols of defiance against the Lord. Every altar to Chemosh, every sacrifice to Molech was open rebellion. Their end was certain. And yet, in the middle of these oracles, a light flickered. From Moab came a woman named Ruth, a young widow, a foreigner, without prospects. Yet she made a choice that changed everything, to accompany her mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Bethlehem, and to adopt the God of Israel as her own. Ruth was no warrior or prophet. She gleaned barley in fields, gathering leftovers after harvesters. But her loyalty and humility caught the eye of Boaz, a righteous man. Their union became a story of redemption. From them came Obed, father of Jesse, grandfather of King David. The sharp irony was rich. From Moab, the nation of temptation and rivalry, came a woman who became mother of Israel's royal line. From the cave of Lot, marked by fear, flowed blood that would run in David's veins. Even more, Ruth's name appears in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, a Moabite woman woven into the messianic line. Proof that God can take twisted beginnings and write hope through them. Ammon did not leave such a bright echo. Their name lingered mostly in tales of hostility, idolatry, and judgment. Yet even they, by existing as neighbors and foes, shaped Israel's journey. Every battle, every border dispute, every confrontation forced Israel to look again to their true protector. Thus Lot's legacy stretched far beyond his cave. From one desperate act came nations. One brought constant enmity, the other constant temptation. Both received prophetic judgment. Yet from among them rose Ruth, carrying the line to David, and from David to the Messiah. Picture a scribe centuries later tracing these genealogies: Moab, enemy; Ammon, rival. Yet from Moab came Ruth, from Ruth came David, and from David came the Christ. What began in fear ended in promise. The echo of Lot did not die in silence. It became part of redemption's story. The silence of the cave had marked Lot and his daughters. There, between damp walls and the echo of loneliness, Moab and Ben-Ami were born. Two children, the result of a desperate decision, but who would grow to become the ancestors of entire nations. Time passed, and those two lives multiplied. The descendants of Moab settled east of the Dead Sea. It was a harsh land, yet fertile in certain valleys. Rocky mountains rose like natural fortresses, and between them streams ran down that in springtime brought forth green pastures. They built villages, tended herds, cultivated wheat and barley, and grew strong in their isolation. Thus the Moabites were born. The sons of Ben-Ami moved further north to a region of rolling hills near what today is Jordan. There they built camps and later fortified cities with stone walls and watchtowers. They were a warrior people, jealous of their borders, always alert against outsiders. Thus the Ammonites arose. Picture those landscapes. At dawn, the reddish sun lighting the Dead Sea like a still mirror, its waters so salty nothing lived in them. On the slopes, goats climbing impossible rocks, shepherds playing reed flutes to gather their flocks, women carrying clay jars of water from hidden springs, the dry air heavy with dust and the scent of hot earth. This was daily life for Lot's descendants. Though they shared the same origin, Moabites and Ammonites were not identical. Moab prospered thanks to its fertile valleys and the trade routes that crossed its territory. It was a people more open to exchange, though fiercely protective of independence. Ammon, on the other hand, developed as a more closed, defensive nation, defined by strongholds and a hostile stance toward neighbors. Yet both carried in their blood the mark of their origin. They were children of the cave, born from fear. And although they grew into powerful peoples, they were always seen by Israel with a mixture of suspicion and memory. Whenever the Israelites looked east, they remembered the story of Lot and his daughters. What had begun as a desperate attempt to preserve a family line had turned into nations. Peoples who would become key players in biblical history, sometimes allies, often enemies. The echo of the cave had become a living border. The Sichir Moabites and Ammonites were not only defined by their lands or fortresses, their identity was shaped by their gods, and those gods marked their history. The Moabites worshipped Chemosh, their chief deity. They called him the god of Moab, and in his honor they raised shrines on the hills. Worship was not symbolic or light. It included animal sacrifices, ritual feasts, and in times of crisis, even human sacrifice. Chemosh was said to demand the most precious gift in exchange for victory or forgiveness. The Ammonites, in turn, worshipped Milcom or Molech, sometimes represented as a human figure with the head of a bull, made of bronze, arms outstretched. According to ancient accounts, those arms were heated red hot, and offerings, sometimes even children, were placed upon them. The image itself is chilling. These rituals sought power and protection at a terrible cost. Picture one of those ceremonies. A hill at dusk, smoke rising from an altar against the sky, drums beating in steady rhythm, priests in scarlet robes chanting. The crowd gathered, shouting, invoking their god. The smell of burning flesh in the air, the heat of fire climbing. Like a wall, for them it was devotion. For Israel it was abomination. The Israelites, descendants of Abraham, had received clear commands against such practices. They were not to sacrifice children, not to bow before images, not to imitate their neighbors. So every time they looked toward Moab or Ammon, they saw not just foreign nations, but living reminders of what they themselves must never become. Spiritual tension was inevitable. Moab and Ammon were not just neighbors with different accents or food. They embodied cults that clashed directly with Israel's faith. That contrast made them constant temptation. There was something seductive in those ceremonies, the pounding drums, the firelight, the promise of immediate prosperity. When Israel grew weak, they fell into the trap. They joined the feasts, shared the wine, bowed before the altars. And whenever that happened, consequences came. Sickness, defeat, judgment. Thus Moab and Ammon consolidated not merely as neighboring nations, but as cultures defined by gods who demanded too much and gave too little. And in that clash of worship, Israel would face some of its hardest trials. The first major clash between Israel and Lot's descendants came during the Exodus. After leaving Egypt and crossing the wilderness, the Israelites approached the lands of Moab and Ammon. Though related, the relationship was anything but friendly. The Ammonites refused to let Israel pass through their territory. Moab, fearful of the massive camp approaching, sought other means of resistance. The Moabite king Balak, seeing the countless Israelites spread across the plains, panicked. Rather than attack with swords, he sought to curse them. He summoned a renowned diviner named Balaam. The plan was simple. If Balaam cursed Israel, Moab would win easily. Balaam set out, but on the way he had a bizarre encounter. His donkey refused to move forward, seeing an invisible angel blocking the road. Furious, Balaam struck the animal until the donkey spoke with a human voice, rebuking him. Only then did Balaam see the angel himself and realize he could not say anything beyond what God allowed. So instead of curses, Balaam pronounced blessing over Israel repeatedly. Balak, frustrated, turned to another tactic. If he could not win by curses, he would win by seduction. At Israel's camp in Shittim, Moabite women began visiting. They invited the men to feasts, shared food and wine, and slowly led them into worshipping Chemosh. What began as hospitality turned into idolatry and forbidden unions. Picture the scene, tents pitched across the plain, the sound of Moabite flutes. Drifting in, young Israelites slipping away from campfires to follow women with smiling faces. Banquets, laughter, incense rising to Chemosh, while the covenant people blurred the line of loyalty. The result was disaster. God's anger burned, and a plague swept through Israel. Thousands died in days. Only when Phinehas, a zealous priest, acted decisively was the plague stopped. From then on, Moab became etched in Israel's memory as a nation of dangerous temptation. Ammon also left its mark early. They denied Israel bread and water along the way, showing open hostility. For that reason, the Lord declared that no Ammonite or Moabite could enter the assembly of the Lord to the 10th generation. They were kin by blood, but strangers in spirit. Thus the first encounters set the tone. Moab as seducer, Ammon as hostile gatekeeper. Two faces of the same origin, both in tension with Israel. Once Israel settled in the Promised Land, Moab and Ammon remained persistent thorns. Not distant empires, but immediate neighbors, always present at the border. During the time of the Judges, the Ammonites grew bold. They oppressed tribes east of the Jordan, sparking cries for deliverance. The answer came through Jephthah, son of a prostitute, rejected by his brothers living as an outcast. Yet when war came, Israel called him back. Jephthah first attempted diplomacy. He reminded the Ammonites that Israel had not taken their land after leaving Egypt, but had respected their borders. The Ammonites, unmoved, pressed their false claims. War followed. And Jephthah defeated Ammon decisively, freeing Israel from oppression. Moab, too, left scars in the Judges' era. Under their king Eglon, they subjugated Israel, demanding tribute. The story tells of Eglon, a very fat man, sitting in his palace in Jericho collecting Israel's taxes. He was assassinated by Ehud, a left-handed judge who concealed a sword under his robe. With one thrust, Ehud ended Moab's rule, and the people rose in revolt. Moab was defeated, and Israel had rest for years. The monarchy did not end the conflict. King Saul fought both Moab and Ammon. Later, David had a particularly complex relationship with Moab. While fleeing Saul, he entrusted his parents to the Moabite king for safety. Yet as king, David fought Moab, defeated them, and made them subjects. Ammon's story with David was sharper. After David sent envoys in friendship, the Ammonite king humiliated them, shaving their beards and cutting their garments. An insult of the highest order. David responded with war. Israel besieged the Ammonite capital of Rabbah. During this siege, David stayed behind in Jerusalem, and there he fell into sin with Bathsheba. While his army fought Ammon, the king of Israel lost his own battle at home. Still, Ammon fell. Rabbah was taken, and the nation subdued. Generation after generation, Moab and Ammon returned as rivals, not vast powers like Egypt or Assyria, but dangerous precisely because they were close. A spark across the hills could ignite war overnight. Thus, the children of the cave had become recurring enemies in Israel's story. Not distant conquerors, but persistent reminders of fragile peace and neighborly strife. The story of Moab and Ammon continued into the words of the prophets. Isaiah lamented Moab, describing cities ruined, pride shattered, altars abandoned. Jeremiah dedicated whole chapters announcing Moab's shame and downfall. Ammon, too, was condemned, Their god, Milcom, would go into exile, their cities deserted. The Fikma charges were clear: Moab's arrogance, Ammon's cruelty, and above all, their false gods. To the prophets they were not mere political adversaries, but spiritual symbols of defiance against the Lord. Every altar to Chemosh, every sacrifice to Molech was open rebellion. Their end was certain. And yet, in the middle of these oracles, a light flickered. From Moab came a woman named Ruth, a young widow, a foreigner, without prospects. Yet she made a choice that changed everything: to accompany her mother-in-law, Naomi, back to Bethlehem, and to adopt the God of Israel as her own. Ruth was no warrior or prophet. She gleaned barley in fields, gathering leftovers after harvesters. But her loyalty and humility caught the eye of Boaz, a righteous man. Their union became a story of redemption. From them came Obed, father of Jesse, grandfather of King David. The irony was rich. From Moab, the nation of temptation and rivalry, came a woman who became mother of Israel's royal line. From the cave of Lot, marked by fear, flowed blood that would run in David's veins. Even more, Ruth's name appears in the genealogy of Jesus in Matthew's Gospel, a Moabite woman woven into the messianic line. Proof that God can take twisted beginnings and write hope through them. Ammon did not leave such a bright echo. Their name lingered mostly in tales of hostility, idolatry, and judgment. Yet even they, by existing as neighbors and foes, shaped Israel's journey. Every battle, every border dispute, every confrontation forced Israel to look again to their true protector. Thus Lot's legacy stretched far beyond his cave. From one desperate act came nations. One brought constant enmity, the other constant temptation. Both received prophetic judgment. Yet from among them rose Ruth, carrying the line to David, and from David to the Messiah. Picture a scribe centuries later tracing these genealogies: Moab, enemy; Ammon, rival. Yet from Moab came Ruth, from Ruth came David, and from David came the Christ. What began in fear ended in promise. The echo of Lot did not die in silence. It became part of redemption's story.